So it's really a pleasure for me to invite Dan Ujzco and Jim Kaderis back up and talk a few minutes to sort of wrap this up. You know, what are some of the themes that we heard today? What are some of the things that we need to move or take on to move this forward? And the other thing is, how do we take this conversation out of the room and share it with other people? So Dan?
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie. Again, good afternoon. I'm Dan Ujzco of the cross-border law firm of Dickinson Wright. Today has been humbling, motivating, and inspiring in many ways. First, the humbling started last night. You've heard a little inside joke a moment ago about ultimate, penultimate. The first way it started, we were at a dinner, and Ed Wolking, who's done so much of the spade work in the Great Lakes region, also is known for a great quote. And he said something to the effect that a prophet is never welcomed in his homeland. And I said, Ed, I've been using that quote for years. I tell it to my wife all the time. When I know that I'm right, I'm never accepted in my house. Where did it come from? I need to get it on needlepoint or something, because that's what 37-year-old guys do, is walk around with needlepoint. But Ed looked at me and he said, Dan, that's like the Bible. That's scripture. And I immediately felt foolish and realized my parents wasted a lot of tuition on 12 years of Catholic education. And then I immediately introduced Sarah Hubbard to one of the few people in the room that had not met Sarah. Sarah and I have known each other for about a dozen years in the Canada-US world, among others. And I said I wanted to show that Sarah is, you know, the definition of action, getting things done. And I said she's the penultimate closer. And everybody froze, and she said, I'm the second best? And I said, wait a minute, no, I meant you're more than the ultimate. You're more than famous, you're infamous. And she, of course, teased me about my Big Ten education from that land-grant college we have down in Columbus. I, of course, woke up, she's from Ann Arbor, that so-called university, and I woke up this morning, and she had a text for me, are you having the ultimate breakfast or the penultimate breakfast? And then lastly, last humbling moment was we went out to the car and we were a little late to the reception, and I told my colleague, who shall remain nameless, just park there, you'll be fine, it's Lansing, it's evening time. And of course he had a parking ticket, and he was questioning my law school education at Case Western Reserve. So with that, I was thinking, what's the way to wrap up today? I have to say that this began a while ago. Anne-Marie called, I think it was back in the spring, maybe early June, and she said, I just met with John Allen and Mary Lynn Becker, my former colleague from the Canadian Consulate, and we were talking about the CN Forum doing something about the Great Lakes. The governors have met, the mayors have met, there's this new institution, and I said, Anne-Marie, it sounds great, but promise me one thing. This is not going to be about designing a new plan, a new strategy, a new strategic visioning session about the Great Lakes. Indeed, if we go forward, let's call the working title of it, Put Up or Shut Up in the Great Lakes region. Something to that effect, because those of us that have been around this for a while know that there's no shortage of visions and statements and plans about the Great Lakes region. And in fact, one of the great successes of recent years is that has come together, that we've actually seen the governors meet for the first time in 8 years, as was said earlier, and a number of other activities. And I thought that would be the starting point as I look over at Jim. I think the first point, and it ties into Ted's comments a little bit, is just how far we've come, is taking stock of where we are. And I think there's very few communities that are harder on ourselves than those of us that grew up here in the Great Lakes region. This happened a few weeks ago. My 2-year-old son, my wife got him dressed, and he came down on a Sunday afternoon in a Browns uniform and Cleveland Browns helmet, and Daddy, go Browns. And I said, I was so proud for a moment that I was immediately said, God, I've cursed this kid for years of misery being a Cleveland sports fan. But we are hard on ourselves in this region, and I think it is important to take stock. And it wasn't that long ago, frankly, that I was sitting in my former colleague George Costaris' office at the Canadian Consulate in Detroit, and Governor Blanchard was on the other end of the phone saying, we need to do something where there's an annual event in Michigan every year focused on Canada-US relations. Just keep in mind, this is a day that when Anne-Marie called and said October 10th, there were 4 other Canadian events today going on. Now those have been moved around and there's people in different places and parts, but 5-6 years ago that wasn't the case. Canada wasn't front page news on Keystone or the bridge or other types of things. I'm always mindful of the former Canadian ambassador to the U.S., Michael Kurgan, who was there from about 2000 to 2005, 2006 in D.C. He always says Canada was on the front page one time during his time there. It was September 11th and everything else. Canada was front page news one time in the major publications, of course, the New York Times, Washington Post, whatever your politics are. So think how far we've come now that CN stepped up to the plate a few years ago and ensured that there would be something in Michigan every year, CN Forum here at Michigan State University, to ensure that this happened. And I think that's a sea change from where we were not that long ago. Ed Wolking, I can recall sitting in meetings with him and Reiner Kunow talking about manufacturing. This is 2004, 2005. Manufacturing was a dirty word. Nobody was talking about it at the time, and he was saying we have to get on the cusp of doing this, and of course that led to the Great Lakes Manufacturing Council. I was on a number of committees right out of law school in Cleveland. You know, how are we going to internationalize Cleveland? And I was young and naive, and I'd say, well, God, we got 40 organizations all doing the same damn thing. You know, and that story could have been told in Detroit, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, elsewhere. Now, you saw with Carol today in the Great Lakes Metro Chambers how you actually see collaboration in a way. So I think it's important. And of course, Bill Russum started with that today. It was 1982 that the governors convened, and then Governor Blanchard carried that forward. Mark Romoff was saying the other day that it was Governor Ridge that brought the Canadian premiers onto the Council of Great Lakes Governors, and now that's routinized in many ways. We hear episodic, but there are activities that are routinized. That's one of the new buzzwords of the day, right? You hear everybody say routinized. That one and existential, those two seem to be at every conference that you go to these days. CSG, the Midwest Legislative Conference. You go there, there's almost more Canadians there, it seems like. You know, that's the way. You let one Canadian and then they'll walk undetected among you and take over your organization. But that's a beautiful thing. So I think that's the first part, that it's humbling in a way when you see all of the work that has been done, both in the Canada-US relationship, but here in the heart of that relationship, the cradle of cooperation, as Governor Blanchard called it. That's the first time I've heard that phrase. I thought I heard all the Canada-US phrases, but that was the first time that I heard that. The second, however, is when you look over at Anne-Marie Schneider. I don't know if you've ever seen Anne-Marie's business card or her signature block on her email. She has 20 titles. You know, Ted was talking about he has 3 jobs. We live in an era of accountability now. The days of the big spending. You know, I worked in government when we actually had money, so nobody liked me. I just bought a lot of friends. I was able to fund a lot of projects. That's how I know half the people in this room. But the reality is that all of us are doing more with less. And as I've thought about this over time, that everybody gets the big idea in Canada-US, right? We go to more conferences where there'll be a strategic vision, and we're going to create the perimeter security and a North American Union, or we're going to create the Great Lakes, and the Great Lakes is going to go around the world attracting investment together, and we're all going to hold hands and do those types of things. And you wonder, have these people ever done any of this? Have you ever looked at it? And the reality is that there's a lot of work to be done. This is hard work. And the people in the room, many of the folks in this room have done that. You just take, for example, one of the things that we've talked about. One of the great things we have going in Canada-US right now is the Regulatory Cooperation Council. Let me tell you, there is nothing at 4:30 after a long day when you say Regulatory Cooperation Council. You know, people are ready to walk out of here. But if you look at Canada-US, if you looked at an economic regression analysis, dear God, you see where the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA, and you see this just, I think it's over 400% growth, if I'm not mistaken. And we funded this study because I was looking for data that showed that 9/11 impacted that trade relationship, that the border thickening, into the never-ender mantra that the border was thickened. And you saw the economy dip after 9/11, but we also saw it kind of flatline around 2000. So you saw this growth, and just slower growth in Canada-US and the North American region, and it just has kind of plodded along on that case. Now it's still growing at about 5%, right? And we couldn't figure out why until I'm a nerdy international trade lawyer, and I said, you know, that's really when NAFTA came into force. And a lot of people, or the NAFTA had kind of run its course. Essentially, most of the implementation of the NAFTA, the fact is it's time to do something different. And that's what the Regulatory Cooperation Council is all about. It's this idea that there's an invisible border for our companies that operate between Canada and the US, and that's just not in Michigan and Ohio. That's down in the Carolinas and Texas. Companies are moving goods and services and crossing the border 6, 8, 12 times. Those are my clients. And now we want it to be easy to cross the border, not too easy. They need lawyers and customs brokers. But that's what we're doing right now. But you never get to the idea of a regulatory harmonization or integration or whatever word. I'm not a diplomat anymore. I can say it, regulatory harmonization. Or perimeter security that was mentioned. There's actually a lot being done on perimeter security right now in the beyond the border process. People wouldn't realize, coming back to my earlier point, that in 2001, border agents didn't talk to each other in Canada across the border 200 yards away. The technologies that we had to actually move freight, to the extent that we had any technology, truck drivers were showing up at the border with handwritten manifests. Now it's all electronic for the most part. But those systems were not integrated not that long ago. They're somewhat not integrated now. You had completely separate customs and compliance procedures on each side of the border. Now that's changing. So we have made great steps forward. And I think it was Kathy Buckner and others and Governor Blanchard identified earlier, in terms of Great Lakes protection, we're actually moving forward in ways that most regions would dream doing. But the fact is, we're never going to get to the big idea, some of which we heard today, of a Great Lakes Venture Capital Association or something of that to attract venture capital, or bringing CEOs and leaders together from Ontario and Ohio and Michigan and other places like that, looking at one common energy strategy for at least the Great Lakes region. Until we do some basic lifting. The one point that I always make, there is not a Canada-U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the world's largest trading relationship. There's organizations that claim it, but they're in all functionality, there's not. There's nothing in Detroit, Windsor right now, save for the Canada-U.S. Business Association. That's actually a place where business leaders can come together and discuss the issues between Canada and the United States. That's in the world's largest trading corridor, or Buffalo, Niagara, and the ones that are in existence, they're fairly new. So there's a lot of spade work still to be done in terms of bringing our countries together, and that's the part that people don't want to hear. You know, everybody wants to come into the Canada-U.S. relationship or Great Lakes relationship and say, I got the perfect idea for you. It's Ted's point from earlier, right? We're going to have a process. I got some sexy charts for you. Let's go forward. Let's put this initiative. We're going to run to the hill. We're going to get it done. Well, who's going to do the spade work? And Roy went through a litany of issues. You never get to the Detroit or the new international trade crossing, the bridge. You really don't have that issue if you really had an educated, not only political elite, but actually a public that understood that we are inextricably intertwined in our relationship. All that time and energy that went into the bridge could have been spent on some broader ideas. Same with Keystone XL. Whatever your politics are on that issue, the fact is there's reasonable minds can differ on that issue, but at least they would be informed by an understanding of how the Canada-U.S. energy relationship works. So, you know, so there are these issues that we could do, and I think I get to go home tonight, and about 7 o'clock I'll open my laptop, and I was thinking earlier, geez, somebody said, boy, you asked the tough question. Why'd you throw that hand grenade today? I didn't mean it that way, but that wasn't the intent. But I was just thinking to myself, are we really a Great Lakes region? You know, or are we cities in the Great Lakes Basin? Maybe we got to split it up, east, west. I don't know the answer to this, but I tell you, at 7 o'clock tonight, I'll stop thinking about it, because I'll open up my laptop and I have to deal with client matters. And I just question how many of you throughout the day-to-day in the world in which we do, we're looking at your BlackBerries, taking care of work back home, and other types of things that we have to do. I think the question that all of us leaving here have to do is, what can we do in our respective organizations, and whether it's private practice of law or chambers of commerce, economic development agencies, what can we do to move from episodic, Roy's word of the day, to something that may be entrenched? What are the programs that we want to entrench? Is it getting legislators together? Is it having a regular meeting of the Council of Great Lakes Governors? Are those the projects that are going to do something? Is it having our chambers of commerce working together to the point that we move from episodic to entrenched to emblematic, that folks around the world are actually looking forward to it, that it can be a relationship for the future? So that's where the motivation comes from. So it's not only humbling to hear everyone's views today, but it's also motivating to what can I do? What can we do? And lastly, it's inspiring, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this today. There are times that in this business, I've been doing this only for about 15 years, Canada-US, but there are days you're like, this is never going to work, you know. Until something, you know, there are days you just throw your hands up and say, you know what, don't build the pipeline, don't build a bridge and see what happens. You know, it's almost like, let the government shut down, we'll see what happens. Let them learn their lesson type of thing. And every time I get into that mode, I look and there's usually some type of event where I see Governor Blanchard. And I have to say, there is somebody, I had the privilege to serve with Governor Blanchard in another capacity. There is rarely a Canada U.S. event in Washington or here in the Great Lakes region or beyond that doesn't have the fingerprints of Governor Blanchard on. I mean, the guy's carrying microphones around today at this activity. And when many people from his time are writing op-eds right now saying Canada U.S. is over, we're done. There's some op-eds, some kind of crotchety people are saying it's done. You know, Governor Blanchard is still here smiling and saying let's plug ahead, and along with a number of other people, Bill Rustum and Roy Norton and a number of others. And I think that's inspiring to us, and I come to where President Simon started the day, which was, it's our time. You know, the past is over. How we got here is irrelevant at this point. There are lessons to be learned. We can pause in the present to reflect on the past, but it's about moving forward, and I think it's our time, and I think the lessons learned. I know Anne Marie has her team of students going through the video today, looking for those golden nuggets that others said. That I think we'll never forget the picture of a cat splashed with spaghetti sauce. And that'll be ingrained in my memory forever. But with that, I offer my assistance in any way that I can, but I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward. And I'll now turn it over to Jim for his comments from the private sector view, and then Anne Marie will wind us down.
My God, I have no idea how they follow that.